Hello, Tom Barnett here again with another story behind the illustration. This one reinforcing a central theme of the book, namely the switch from viewing the world primarily in east-west terms, or horizontally on a world map, to viewing it more in north-south terms, or vertically on a world map. The distinction this time, here we wanted to show how the three vertical slices matched up fairly neatly with the U.S. military's regional combatant commands around the world. This is the original slide I generated about a dozen years ago in my standard briefing deck. Here I was just introducing the notion that when you view the world in this manner, these three vertical slices, you realize how different the security landscape is in each instance. In the West, there's basically the U.S. as hegemon and nobody else. In Asia, you have a rising hegemon in the form of China. And in the center, you really have a plethora of superpowers and great powers all vying for influence and control. The European Union, Russia, Turkey, Iran, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Israel, a pretty long list. America had spent years, really the entire post-Cold War period, working the instabilities of that center slice, only to tire and attempt to pivot to Asia, a shift interrupted by the war in Ukraine and Israel's latest beatdown of its various opponents. Meanwhile, the East, the Asian slice, remains quiet, if tense. Now, we'd already introduced this logic twice before in the book. First, in thread 8, where I contrasted my old Pentagon's new map image with this new north-south perspective. And then, right after that, in through line 2, where I made the argument that climate change really seals the deal on that transformed strategic perspective. In the brief today, I use the argument that I present in the text of this particular thread really as my conclusion, arguing by process of elimination across the other two vertical slices that it really makes the most sense for the U.S. to pursue regional integration efforts first and foremost in the Western Hemisphere. Now, when we started to imagine the right image for this thread, Sarah Nuttall came up with a couple of interesting conceptuals. First, this one that sort of suggests the other superpowers in bed together in their regional integration efforts across the Eastern Hemisphere, sort of leaving the U.S. out in the cold, so to speak. Kind of funny and cute, but it requires too much explaining. Sarah's other idea, I just couldn't wrap my mind around it. It has this new kid at his or her first day of going to school vibe. With those two conceptuals seeming so off the mark, in my opinion, and it really was a rare failure for Sarah, who typically seeded us with what ultimately became the final book image. In light of that, Jim Nuttall's first take on the issue was just to keep it simple, slice the map up literally, and throw down the three labels. Because I knew I wanted to make some reference to the U.S. military's Unified Command Plan and its division of the world into 6 regional combatant commands, or COCOMs, I sent this image to Jim to see if he could work it into his original take. Jim came back with something too literal for my taste, and yet I liked how it informed the reader. It was almost like we were combining a cartoon illustration with a data visualization, and I kind of liked that ambition. So to sort of square that circle, I asked Jim to put in the 2 dividing lines that would make clear the 3 vertical slices, and to see how that would look on this kind of more detailed map. And that helped. That kind of got the basic notion across. But there was still too much military and not enough seeing the world in the new vertical manner for my taste with this rendition. So Jim then made the right call and mashed up the two versions that we were kind of pivoting between. His original chopped up map with its 3 labels, but then with the more detailed unified command plan map kind of overlaid on top of those 3 vertical slices. And that really did the trick for me. That version sailed through the Red Team review with no changes, largely because it so neatly mirrored the opening text of the thread. And thus, that version became the final book version. The point here being to reinforce, yet again for the reader, this central theme of the book, that we need to view the world from a different perspective, more vertical, less horizontal, because that's the key vector of necessary integration being forced in a world as it's decimated by climate change, triggering the mass migration of all species, but particularly humans, poleward, or more often towards the north. So 3 very different vertical slices in terms of power arrangements and in terms of climate impact, and yet these different regions fairly neatly line up to how the U.S. military has long organized, visualized its own map of the world. And that's the story behind this illustration. As always, we love it when people buy the book, when they recommend the book, when they praise the book online. I and my Throughline colleagues, we feel very passionate about this work. Please consider subscribing to my Substack newsletter. And see you next time, next illustration.